Welcome back. We're talking about solving absolute value equations. And in our last video, we looked at what the absolute value operation is. And now I want to kind of start to look at some absolute value equations. So if I have the absolute value of x minus c is equal to r as just a generic equation that I might have, what's going to end up happening when I solve this is I'm going to have to break this up into two different things. When I start with the absolute value of x minus c is equal to r, if I have a positive quantity that I put inside the absolute value, it's going to be a positive value. If I have a negative value that I put inside the absolute value, it's also going to be positive. So the absolute value of r is equal to r, and the absolute value of negative r is equal to r. So what that means is this quantity inside could either be positive or negative r to make a true statement. Remember, we're trying to make true statements whenever we solve. So when I have an absolute value, if this inside of the absolute value is positive or negative of whatever the quantity on the right side is, I'll get a true statement. And this is going to form the foundation of how we solve absolute value equations. It's this process of isolating, splitting, solving, and checking. Before we get into too much solving, I want to look at this idea of the absolute value of x minus c is equal to r. And I think that this gets, we can kind of start to see some of this when we look at a real world example. So the real world example we're going to look at here is a standard adult tennis racket, has a 100 square inch head, plus or minus 20 square inches. Write and solve an absolute value equation to determine the least and greatest possible sizes for the head of an adult tennis racket. Now, this might seem kind of easy. It's 100 plus or minus 20. So that would be 120 as the maximum and 80 as the minimum. But we're going to use this form of absolute value of x minus c is equal to r to go through and use this. So what I want to look at is I'm going to turn this into kind of the words that I might use, or I'm going to write it out symbolically. So this is 100 square inches plus or minus 20 square inches. Now this is the center, right? I have 100 inches, 100 square inches, and I can go up 20 and I can go down 20. Okay, so these distances, this is going to be 100 minus 20 and this is going to be 100 plus 20. Okay, so I've got a maximum and a minimum. So I have a higher and a lower. This is the center of that, and this is my error, okay? So we're going to call that an error. If I look at my number line here, so I have my 100 square inches, and this is 100 square inches plus 20 square inches, and this is 100 square inches minus 20 square inches. This is 20 and this is 20, okay? So the absolute value of this difference is 20. The absolute value of this difference is 20. The absolute value of a difference is something, and that's what we want to look at. The absolute value of a difference is 20. So my center I'm going to write as C and my error is R. So my center here is 100 and my error is 20. So that means I can plug into this formula, the absolute value of x minus the center is equal to the error. And if we follow that thought process of solving, this gets divided up into two things. x minus 100 could be equal to positive 20, or x minus 100 could be equal to negative 20. So if I go ahead and solve this, x is equal, I'm going to add 100 to each side. X is equal to 120. And if I add 100 to each side here, x is equal to 80. So this is a minimum of 80 inches squared and a maximum of 120 inches squared. And I got there using absolute value equations, but I started with this thought process. So I have 100 plus or minus 20. Whatever your center is C. Whatever your error is R. You go ahead and plug in, and then we're going to follow this setup to solve the equation. In our next video, we're going to look at solving equations, not word problems.